we have seen especially from US and the West, the wave of the great resignation that started.
Yes.
And now we are also coming across this idea of the great reshuffle. It's especially being triggered from how people who had been working for last couple of years in homes now have an opportunity to choose to come to the workplace or keep working from home. How should companies think about hybrid workplaces? And what is the employee's mindset today around the great reshuffle?
Let's talk about the great resignation first of all, and understand that this is not a concept that is relevant for low and middle income countries, for countries like India. This was a concept that was coined specifically for the US job market, where you had an overabundance of jobs and a lot of people were burnt out, or they had experienced freedom during the pandemic and they just don't want to work anymore. A couple of days ago, there was an article, I think, in the Wall Street Journal or Washington Post, which said that people are doing everything except work. They're going shopping, they're meeting friends, all of that. So they're clearly not scared anymore about exposing themselves, but they just don't want to work. And you have to, it's not hard to understand why. Nobody wants to, be tied to these oppressive structures which give them very little control of their lives. Younger employees want the freedom to choose what they want to do. They want purpose, meaning, and work as it was before the pandemic was not giving them that. So they have had it essentially. But this is a Western construct. The problem is, because the world's media is dominated still by American ideas, everybody started writing about the great resignation as if this is happening even here. Barring the IT sector, where talent retention has always been a challenge, right? There is no such thing as the great resignation happening in India.
Yeah.
What is happening, indeed, is this, the sort of great churn and anxiety that employers have now about how to bring people back to the office. And there is no consensus. This is an evolving scenario. There are no easy answers. But some companies, they're just sort of throwing things out there and seeing what sticks, essentially. So one thing is very clear. Companies can no longer unilaterally decide anything. You can't just say from next Monday, everybody has to report to work. It is not going to happen, right? Some people, because we still have a precarious employment situation, some people might feel compelled, might feel forced, but there are plenty of startups out there that are giving flexible work, offering flexible work arrangements, and you will lose your talent very, very quickly if you try to be dictatorial about this. So this has to be a consultative process. You have to ask your staff, really understand, what do you need people in the office for? Right? Is it just to justify this huge real estate cost that you're now incurring? And so you need heads to fill this space? Because that's not a good reason, right? Another reason could be that, certain collaborative tasks, certain tasks that require innovative thinking, etc. There is a theory that you can only do those things in, physically proximate groups. But there is also now research coming out that says that, hey, people are very capable of innovative thinking even in isolation. So there are contradictory, reports coming out. But yes, let's just go with sort of conventional wisdom and say, when you want all hands on board for certain, maybe for sprints or things like that, you want to bring your team together. But there cannot be a hard and fast rule. For instance, I know of several people who during the pandemic relocated to smaller cities, to hill stations, to reclaim, just that space and freedom in their lives. Are you going to ask them now to move back to a big city, leave all that behind? That'll be cruel, and nobody's going to, really like that. And they're going to leave very quickly whenever they find another employer who's going to allow them to work from wherever they are. So I think work from wherever you are is going to be the direction.
Right. So what you're saying is that talk to your team members and understand what is their comfort. But this is not an opinion which you and I could speak for.
Exactly.
All the corporates. True. So what you're saying is that the leaders need to work with their teams and understand how the teams are the most. What constitutes the most psychological safe workspace definition for them.
Yeah, and it has to also work for the employer, right? It has to work for the employer. I remember during the pandemic, several headlines came out saying ABC company will now allow its people to work remotely. Or XYZ company lets his employee work remotely. And that's very feudal. This, to say that a company is now allowing you to work remotely is very feudal. If this is going to require a lot of very complicated mathematics, and we are aware that this is not going to be easy for employers, right? And I have a feeling that if you do this, if you take a consultative approach, your team members are reasonable. They will understand. And I think when you ask somebody for their opinion, that's such a giant leap in terms of trust building, that the rest of the pieces will fall in place. There will be some upheaval in the short run, but you will be able to identify a formula. Look, ultimately, I think what companies need to get comfortable with is the idea that you can't settle down and say, now this is how it's going to be for the next 20 years. This was the way businesses conducted themselves pre-pandemic, right? And even if the pandemic did not happen, there was already a groundswell from among employees that the old way of doing business has to change, right? So business leaders, boards, management, they have to get used to the idea that that nothing is going to be set in stone. Because the reason why things were set in stone earlier was because there was one-way traffic. Companies were deciding and employees were simply accepting these policies. But companies are now suddenly finding themselves in this very reluctant position where they have to ask their employees for everything, whether it's the mental health policies, workplace well-being policies. So during our conversations, we have again and again said this: communicate, ask, talk, consult. And that is very upsetting for a lot of companies that are not used to this, that are used to top-down management. So first of all, you have to get comfortable with this idea. Maybe take therapy and get used to the idea that there is no one-way traffic anymore.
You think take a therapy before you how to
Why
conduct
not?
yourself
Absolutely.
in a workplace?
I mean, it's a very human reaction, right? Again, I'll give you a concrete example. There was a story that said that a bunch of middle managers and senior leaders were surveyed, and they said that they had designed policies for the return to the workplace after the pandemic. They designed policies, and when they were asked had they talked to their team members, an overwhelming majority said they hadn't. So how do you even do this? Like, you sit in a room and 5 of you get together and just decide for 20,000 employees? That makes no sense to me. The reason this happens is because companies are now in a hurry to come back and reclaim that control over their employees. See, organizations get work done or dominate their employees through command and control. And therefore, the workplace, the role that it played in the pre-pandemic world was as the site where that control got played out. They are in front of your eyes, they're under your direct watch. There are cameras everywhere, you have to swipe your card every time you have to get out of the building. So employees are under watch all the time. And it's a frightening moment for organizations to let go of that control suddenly. So the workplace was not just, it did not really, it was as important for the companies to feel that they're in control over their employees' lives as it was as a site of collaboration, innovation, and things like that, right? So I understand that a lot of leaders and managers are anxious, and if it helps them to speak to somebody and get counseled, why not?
Yeah,
there is no, it's not a taboo.
Use a consultative-led approach. Create a lot more focus groups, discussions within the employees.
Yes.
Use that focus group to come with initial draft of what your initiatives could look like. Yes. And then solicit feedback widely from your workforces, whether this is something which resonates with a larger workforce.
Yes.
The way how I decipher or how I understand this is that the nature of hybrid, the experiments will continue to happen. Some companies are forward-looking in experiments. Some companies are waiting and watching of which experiments show what kind of results. And what I hear from you is that instead of waiting and watching, it's okay to go out experiment and fail,
Yeah.
and learn for yourself, because every organization's DNA is unique in itself.
Yeah.
And they need to figure out what works best for them and their people.
Absolutely. And I just two more things just came to mind. One was, I was reading about this company that is now very eager to get its staff back, but it's happening very slowly because a lot of people are just dragging their feet. They're just, their lives are elsewhere now. And for them to come back to office, 2-hour commutes, they're just not interested. So they have created this bizarre situation now where a handful of people who live close to the office, and you have to understand that living close to the office is a luxury that a lot of people can't afford, right? So 5 employees are coming to the office every day. The entire office is empty. And now these 5 employees are having to do Zoom calls with the other employees who are not yet back at the workforce. So these 5 people are now feeling extremely, pissed off as to why they are being asked to come to office. Is it their fault that they live near the office while others don't? So, this sort of staggered approach also, this is very complicated.
Yeah.
And the other thing...
And there are a lot of organizations who are going through this.
There are many organizations that are going through this.
And what do you think is at the helm of this? Is maybe an indecision is at the helm of it, that this has not been a consultative-led
Exactly.
approach?
I think that delay in communicating, that delay in having these conversations is causing this chaos, right? If you can eliminate heartburn by just having an open, honest conversation. And maybe one conversation won't be enough. Maybe have 10 conversations, right? But then you will do it right. And then you don't have to worry about, the side effects of a hasty policy.
Let's say there are a bunch of people leaders who have a really strong opinion of being at the workplace. They don't believe in this idea of remote or hybrid. Should they go and open up a conversation? Because what if this comes out that their employees really want to be remote?
Well, then they have to be remote. Your belief is useless. Nobody cares what your belief is, stubborn belief system was okay in a world where command and control ruled the roost. But in this world, in this new world, you have to let go of your beliefs if it is not backed by researched evidence. And the other thing, again, I was talking about the kind of compromises that employees can be asked to make if they have to have an all-remote work from anywhere kind of policy. And I refer to wage revisions and pay cuts that a lot of companies were instituting, right? Most of these conversations created a severe backlash. I was very, very appalled that a big company, I won't name the company, but anyone can find out, a huge company could not afford, or had to decrease pay for a handful of people who had moved further away from office and therefore could not come to work every day.
This is India or outside?
It's a huge global MNC. Okay. This is outside.
Yeah.
But these ideas travel very, very fast. So a lot of people were very angry. Why are people being asked to take a pay cut just because now they're working away from office? And there are all sorts of reasons, all sorts of mathematics again that companies can cite to justify that decision, right? Including differences in cost of living across cities, etc. Once again, if you do this, if you take any step based on consultation rather than through diktat, then it's not going to be such a bitter pill to swallow.
I think this also leads us to the larger point of any sort of a policy building or any sort of workplace initiative should start from a people-centered approach.
Absolutely.
Should understand where the people are coming from, who these people are, what their personalities are, what their preferences are, and then which what you're saying is make this as a consultative-led approach, and you would see this diverse people who may have a common mission or a purpose which this workforce have very different preferences of how they want to achieve to that purpose or mission. Yeah. No, that's a very powerful thing. I think it's a consultative-led workplace building and initiatives. I think this theme of last 10 to 15 minutes is in itself is a this idea of consultative-led rather than a diktat or command control is a very important topic.